Hey there, Culture Gabfest listeners. Before we start the show, I want to let you know about a story coming up a little later. It's from one of our sponsors, Charles Schwab. At Schwab, a passion for serving clients is not just part of a job description. It's one of their core values. It's this human element that helps set Schwab apart. Stick around to hear how Ray, a Schwab employee who designs digital experiences, works to provide more people with access to the financial tools and knowledge they deserve. The Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by Progressive. Are you thinking more about how to tighten up your budget these days? Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary, discounts vary, and are not available in all states and situations.
I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Raiders of the Lost Childhood edition. It's Wednesday, November 30th, 2022. On today's show, The Fablemans is an autobiopic. I'm surprised to find that word is in my spell check. It's an autobiopic from Steven Spielberg. The legendary director has given us an intimate reminiscence of his childhood. This stars Gabriel LaBelle as the adolescent Steven and Michelle Williams as his extraordinary but possibly broken mother, maybe not broken mother. And then a new Hulu show, Welcome to Chippendales, gives us the much-needed origin story of the male strip club, story of intrigue, double-dealing, drug abuse, some murder thrown in. It stars Kumail Nanjiani as the franchise's up-by-his-own bootstraps founder. And finally, we talk Tay again. Not really, but in angering her fans, monopoly price gouger Ticketmaster may have finally bitten off more than it can chew. Joining me today is Sam Adams, who is a treasured writer and editor for Slate. Sam, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Always a huge pleasure. And of course, Dana Stevens is the film critic for Slate, and now most famously the author of this episode's title. Wonderful title.
That'll be on my tombstone. She wrote a good title once. Hi, Steve. Hi, Sam.
How many people can say that even, really?
That's true. That is true. Let's dig in. Steven Spielberg is forever in the pantheon for the string of films he made as a wunderkind director in the 1970s and 80s. I mean, do I even need to name them, right? Jaws is the first blockbuster. Close Encounters, to my mind, the greatest American Hollywood movie ever made. E.T., of course, just on and on, up through Schindler's List, Catch Me If You Can, the Jurassic Park films. Underneath all the escapism and the social importance has always been an achingly personal filmmaker. He's kind of played a little bit of peekaboo with that over the years. Well, he has now made a movie that shows us directly both the origins of his love of film and its escapist possibilities, and that from which he maybe tried to escape but never quite did, the nuclear family that was abundant in love, emotional safety, imagination, but also secrets and heartbreak. The movie is co-written by the playwright Tony Kushner. Okay, we're going to hear a clip. In the movie, the young Spielberg is called Sammy Fableman. We're going to hear Sammy's father, played wonderfully by Paul Dano, ask his son to compile footage from a recent family vacation and turn it into a home movie. The two of them are perpetually at odds over whether his filmmaking is just a hobby or a serious possible vocation. Let's listen to the clip.
I want you to make a camping trip movie. You can learn how the editing machine works while you do this. It'll make your mom feel better.
Yeah.
That last night when she danced in the headlights, that'd be great. Get to it tomorrow, okay?
Tomorrow's when we start shooting. Escape to nowhere. We're shooting all weekend.
Shooting next weekend.
We got like 40 guys coming to be in the movie. I'll work on all the camping trip stuff on Monday.
I'm asking you to do this now for your mom.
Yeah, and I said that I will, just not tomorrow.
Don't be selfish. She just lost her mother. That's more important than your hobby.
Dad, can you stop calling it a hobby?
It'll cheer her up watching this. It's something we can
Her
do.
mom just died. How is that going to cheer her up?
Because you made it for her.
Dana, let me start with you. I think a very important detail in that clip is the music you hear in the background isn't, in some sense, the soundtrack or score of the film. It's the Spielberg figure's mother, played by Michelle Williams, playing the piano on the first floor of the house. She pervades this movie. It's in many ways as much or more a movie about her and her influence on his life. What do you make of this film?
I mean, I have so much to say about it that I'll limit my first response to just saying I really want to send people, even if they're resistant to this movie based on, preconceptions about what a Spielberg auto biopic might be like, or the trailer, which I agree, having come across the trailer many times in the past few months, that the trailer misrepresents the movie as something that it's not. So this is not a kind of sappy, nostalgic ode to young Spielberg's love for cinema and love for his family. And there is lots of love for cinema and love for his family members in the movie, but maybe because of the Kushner collaboration, and Kushner and Spielberg have a history going way back of collaborating on screenplays, there's something much darker that comes in. And what most impressed me about this movie, I think, and it's one of my favorite movies of the year so far, is the extent to which the screenplay allows in critique of Spielberg and critique of his way of making movies, and that there's a lot of thinking about filmmaking and the moral responsibilities of the filmmaker woven into the screenplay. And I don't want to spoil exactly how that gets woven in, but that to me was the most surprising and the strongest part of this movie.
Yeah, I think Sam, Dane is really getting at something here. That there is something to that. I mean, almost you could argue that everything about this movie is in the discrepancy between it and its trailer. It's really about how nostalgia and love really are very different, or can be very different things. What do you make of Spielberg giving this to us?
Well, I mean, I think I agree with what Dan is saying, and I would really praise kind of above all with this movie, the screenplay, which is co-written first by Spielberg, which is the first movie that he's had his name on as a writer since AI, and Tony Kushner, who has written a lot of his best movies in recent years. I feel like that is woven into almost every scene, and I also feel like in a lot of those scenes, I feel Spielberg, the director, kind of pulling his punches and not really getting to the heart of this. And I saw this movie first at the world premiere at the Toronto Film Festival, which kind of back in September, which kind of gives you an idea of the sort of two roads it's trying to walk at the same time. Because Spielberg doesn't make film festival movies; he makes sort of big blockbusters, but he's trying to do kind of a smaller, boutiquier, more personal thing here, and he's kind of doing it and kind of not fully willing to do it. I was really put off by Michelle Williams' performance, which I feel is just really kind of like overstated. I think she's like one of the greatest actors of her generation. And I think what she's doing in this movie is just way off and like not what I want to see from her at all. So I think that scene that we just heard is a great moment in the movie where Spielberg is, his character is kind of assembling footage from the camping trip and uncovers this sort of family secret, which apparently is based on a real event. But it also feels, extremely like a scene out of Brian De Palma movie, especially like Blowout. His character even reminds me a little like Keith Gordon in Dressed to Kill. And those movies are kind of all about like sort of guilt and really, the filmmaker is kind of a voyeur, or that being an inherently suspect thing. And I feel like this movie kind of wants to say that and kind of, veers away from it a little bit. And I don't think it implicates its hero as much as it should.
That's interesting. I mean, there's so much to unpack, but let me start maybe with Michelle Williams, which is, I do think you're not going to, connect with or lose yourself to this movie unless you lose yourself first to her performance. And in the trailer, given the trailer, I went in expecting the very worst and actually came out completely in love with that character and that performance. But I certainly have no trouble seeing why someone might go the other way. But it's her movie, and it's really what I love about the film is that it is a biopic rooted in an actual set of lived and deeply felt experiences. And for Spielberg, so much of the magic of life actually comes, both the danger and the magic of life comes from the mid-century nuclear family, right? Which both cosseted and scaffolded and imprisoned and suffocated. And he can handle that balance, but it also cohered and broke apart in ways that completely defined him as a human being, because it was idyllic. And I believe the pastoral of that nuclear family. And I also believe that what broke it apart was the moving around of the father and, various things that I don't want to disclose that one learns about the mother. But so to me, it was an emotionally real film, and it captured something that I think filmmakers often have trouble with, which is the mystery of having parents whose existence gave rise to yours completely, but also preceded yours in an abundant and essentially undisclosed ways, right? Like you will never fully know what they were like until the moment when you arrived. And there is a way in which now I know as a parent, a part of you freezes in place at the moment your first child arrives. And it's kind of unfreezing that mystery or attempting to deepen the sense of connection by kind of breaking down that mystery. And I liked, Dana, that he kept intact. It was both a closeness and a distance that I really respected, that something very deep and profound was going on with his mother. And in those hidden spaces arose the woman who gave him his devotion to imagination and storytelling. But and I like that he attempted to understand it without, in some ways, violating its essential dignity, which was her experience and not his. It's not a plaything. It's not a CGI dinosaur. I thought this was a very human and very heartfelt film. And it avoided much of the pomp and self-regard not all of it, but a substantial amount of the pomp and the self-regard of a Bildungsroman of like, here's what went into the making of the man who could make Jaws at the age of 20 or whatever, 15 or whatever. He was super young. I connected with, what did you think of Michelle Williams in the film specifically?
Well, now I want to have a sidebar with Sam. I want to confer with him over bourbon about actually watch the movie with him so that we can specifically take apart her performance, because I thought she was what made the movie. But I definitely agree that it's a performance that goes to some uncomfortable places. I mean, this is, again, what impressed me so much about this movie, is that what could have been a Valentine to cinema, a Valentine to his beloved mother who died at age 97, within the past decade. In fact, both of his parents have now passed. Spielberg's parents have at quite elderly ages, which I think has finally freed him to make this movie about them, which is loving, but also definitely shows, the rough edges of his family. I mean, the portrait that Michelle Williams creates is so complex. I get into this in my review of Fablemans for Slate, but is she a good parent? Is she a bad parent? Does that matter? She's something of a narcissist. She is, as you said, Stephen, a frustrated concert pianist who never had a career because she's bringing up these 4 kids. And there's a side of her that is this angry 1950s boomer era housewife who doesn't want to be tied down. She serves all their meals on paper plates so that she doesn't have to do the dishes. She's established as this kind of free spirit who is lovable and eccentric, but also a narcissist. And she's just so fascinatingly complex. And to me, the heart of the movie, and I can't get too into it without spoilers, but there's a shot of just her face watching a movie that her son made, the one that we hear the father character encouraging him to make in that clip we heard. And we don't see what she sees on screen. We only see her reaction to it as the light flickers on her face. And to me, that was the tour de force heart of the movie. But I think that if you have a problem with sincerity cringe, this movie may get you in parts, because it's it's very much Steven Spielberg laying his heart open to you, and as he himself would no doubt own, he is something of a sentimentalist. But the stuff that really got me in this Fablemans movie are the moments when you think it's going to veer that way and it veers another way, which have to do with the mother usually. And then one incredible scene that I still haven't completely unpacked, where he makes a movie about his high school bully, right? That whole section of the movie is quite astonishing, because you think it's going one way and then it veers in a completely other direction. Something we also haven't mentioned about this movie at all and that I think you guys will agree with me on, is that it's funny. It's not
Yeah.
portentous. And if it does have that Bildungsroman structure, it's a kind of comic Bildungsroman.
Yes.
So, there's lots of sequences that are just in there for a laugh. Judd Hirsch comes in for a one-scene cameo that's hilariously funny. So if people go into it thinking, this is just all going to be about a man unpacking his own painful childhood and holding it up before our eyes, no, that's happening, but it's happening in a very Spielbergian atmosphere of mischief and playfulness.
Right. For me, it's a movie that is, the opening scene of the whole movie is little Steven Spielberg, little Sammy Fableman, waiting in line to see his very first movie, which he's afraid of. And his parents are kind of telling him what it's going to be like. And his dad, who's this computer scientist, is explaining persistence of vision to him. The film goes through the projector 24 frames a second, but the brain only sees 15, blah, blah, blah. And then his mother turns to him and says, movies are dreams that you never forget. And that sort of, Apollonian Dionysian tendency is like woven all through it. I think it's why the movie for me kind of feels at war with itself in a certain way and doesn't totally cohere, but I think it's also fascinating. And it definitely is the kind of movie that will make you look at every other Spielberg movie differently when you go back and watch them. And I think it's very much worth it for that. It doesn't all come together for me. I think there are some amazing scenes in it and some things that totally don't work. But I would urge people, especially since it just had its opening weekend at the box office and flopped, to go see it either in theaters or I think it comes out on Peacock or something in a few weeks. It's definitely a movie to catch up with at some point.
Sam, I just have to ask you, this is one of the things I would ask you over our Michelle Williams bourbon. Do you think another actress could have done that same role as written better than she did? In other words, is your reservation more about the character or about her performance of it?
It might be a little bit of both. I inevitably find myself kind of putting this up against Armageddon Time, which is another movie that I love from this year, which is another sort of, Jewish filmmakers coming of age story. And I just think of Anne Hathaway as the mom in that one. I feel like she, in a way, might have been able to do this kind of mother who is self-theatricalizing, but also kind of very fragile underneath it in a way that felt a little more natural. I just feel like Michelle Williams is, I think, I said before, she's one of the greatest actors of her generation. I think her performance in Kelly Reichardt's Wendy and Lucy is an absolute totem for me. And I think that stillness is kind of what I really value in her. And the more sort of performative stuff is just, that does not feel like her wheelhouse to me.
Gosh, I did have the opposite reaction. I guess where I come out on this movie is if someone were to say to you, Steven Spielberg has made a deeply felt autobiographical movie, and the kind of algebraic abstractions that would immediately occur to you, it's going to be somewhat self-regarding, it's going to be very sentimental, deeply suspiciously nostalgic, and didactic. All of them are true enough. But within that, he has done something very, very human, very extraordinary in my estimation. And as to her performance, again, there's no de gustibus, right? There's no arguing. I certainly see it as a performance that would divide moviegoers. And Sam, you and I just went in totally, opposite directions. But one thing I would say is that in terms of the way the character is written, there's a moment in the trailer, which gives nothing away to say, where she's sort of dancing by firelight in a see-through, effectively translucent dress. And in the trailer, it's very bad Spielbergian. It seems larded over with, fake imagination and nostalgia. In the movie, it's actually a deeply, deeply equivocal, excruciatingly equivocal moment. It embarrasses, her daughter to no end. The daughter wants to stop it desperately. And I won't give anything away, but every piece of that sequence is actually bravura and very precisely felt. In fact, it's not loaded over. It's as much about the mother's attempt to create a moment like that, and the child's embarrassment and suspicion over it, possibly. That's not necessarily how Sammy feels in that moment, but he certainly has mixed feelings. And to me, that was the movie that really surprised me. So it was sort of going in with the expectation of didacticism, et cetera, self-importance, and discovering these deep crannies of human feeling and highly specific truth-telling. That to me was sort of, frankly, it was kind of mind-blowing. So anyway, it is the Fablemans. It divided us in interesting ways, to put it mildly. So here I say, seek it out. I think especially because it's slightly hard to find, that's a sign that he did something unexpected. Go see it and tell us what you thought. All right, let's move on.
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Now through December 25th, get 5% daily cash back on products at Apple with a new Apple Card, including a new iPhone 14 or Apple Watch Ultra. And everywhere else, Apple Card gives you up to 3% unlimited daily cash back on everything you buy. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval, monthly financing through Apple Card monthly installments is ineligible to earn 5% back. Additional exclusions apply. Valid only on qualifying U.S. purchases for new Apple Card customers who open an account and use it from December 1st to 25th, 2022 at Apple. Visit apple.co/save5 for more details.
All right, well, now is the moment in our podcast where we discuss business. Dana, what do we got this week?
Stephen, first of all, it's getting close to the end of the year 2022, which means that it's time to start getting ready for our annual listener call-in episode. This is a tradition we have that we end the year with, where for our last show of the year, we have listeners send us whatever questions they want about culture, about our own personal lives to a degree, and whatever else they want. And we choose our favorite questions and answer them during a special episode. So if there's anything you've been dying to ask us, call us and leave a message at 908-977-6807. Once again, that number is 908-977-6807. Or, as always, you can email your question to us at culturefest@slate.com. And we'll compile those questions, choose our favorites, and get ready to answer them on a show. We don't know exactly yet when this episode will air, but it will be toward the end of the year, and we will keep you all posted so you can remember to tune in. In the meantime, start thinking about questions to send in to us or call in. Our second item of business today is to tell you about our Slate Plus segment. Today, we are answering a listener question, very recent one, from a listener named Emily, who writes, "Is there a song that instantly makes you cry no matter how hard you try to control it?" She goes on to say the 3 songs that make her cry are Landslide by Stevie Nicks, Return to Pooh Corner by Kenny Loggins, I love that one, and This Woman's Work by Kate Bush. We were tossing this around in prepping the episode and realized that we all had multiple song titles that make us cry, so we're going to talk about music and tears for our Slate Plus segment. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that discussion at the end of this show. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. When you're a member, you will get ad-free podcasts, bonus segments like the one I just described, and many other shows have them too, and of course, unlimited access to all of the writing on slate.com. You'll never hit a paywall when you're a member of Slate Plus. And most important, you will be supporting us, our work, and the journalism of our wonderful colleagues. These memberships are really important for Slate, so please sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. Once again, that's slate.com/cultureplus. Okay, Steve, back to the show.
All right, well, Kumail Nanjiani stars as Soman Banerjee. When we first meet him, he's a gas station attendant in L.A., extremely enterprising, patient, painstaking, ambitious. And we soon learn that he saved up just enough to start his own business. This becomes an ill-fated backgammon club. This is his idea of sort of starting a Hefner-esque gentlemanly club for playing backgammon. It predictably totally bombs. But then we follow through a bunch of twists and turns by which it becomes the multi-billion-dollar beefcake empire known as Chippendales. Welcome to Chippendales is on Hulu. It stars, in addition to Nanjiani, Juliette Lewis, the ever-amazing Murray Bartlett as Nick DeNoia, the choreographer whose creative input transformed the business. In this scene, Banerjee, who's changed his name to Steve, meets with DeNoia and asks him for his help in his new business, and he thinks Nick is just the guy. Let's listen up.
The reason I wanted to meet with you was I was hoping to get your thoughts.
My thoughts?
On the show, you called it a flaming pile of trash.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
That it's trash.
That it's a show. A show has choreography, production values, narrative. What you have is a crass spectacle, a cheap gimmick devoid of the slightest hint of stagecraft or professionalism.
What would you do?
Oh, to turn it into something half decent? An actual show that maybe could last?
Yes.
Well, I'm not fucking telling you. People pay big bucks for my
Sam,
expertise.
let me start with you. Murray Bartlett's so good, right? I mean, the best thing about White Lotus turns out is the best thing about Welcome to Chippendales. We'll get there. What'd you make of it overall?
I mean, well, I do love that Murray Bartlett performance, and I have to say that even after sitting through the credits and in the first episode, Camille Nanjiani and Murray Bartlett are the only people who are kind of listed at the top. And I sort of kept waiting for Murray Bartlett to show up, even as that character Nick DeNoia turns up on the scene, and then I had to be like, "Oh, right, that's him." Like that's the sort of that's the Australian guy from the White Lotus. I mean, it's a really like immersive performance in that way. So I love him in this. The series itself, I kind of have mixed feelings about. I wanted something a little more, frankly, in the vein of Magic Mike, a little more celebratory. The fact that the source material for this is a book called Deadly Dance, The Chippendales Murders, gives you a sense of the kind of cautionary tale angle that it's going in with. There is a murder at the end of the first episode, which has a really tenuous connection to this story. And I'm not entirely crazy about how they use, but I think it's really sort of pushing in that direction that, oh yes, women get to go and have this good time, but there's this like seedy underbelly that's eventually going to consume them all. And that feels a little played out to me.
Yeah, Dana, I wouldn't describe freshness to this product as good as Bartlett is and Nanjiani and various other people. What'd you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, this has, I guess, a little bit of the prestige TV problem. There's good stuff, but it takes a while to get to it. And as an avowed preferrer of the movie format to the TV format in general, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the first episode is the worst, and it really does get better after that. There's a red herring murder, as Sam indicated at the beginning of the first episode, that has nothing to do with the rest of the show and sets a tone that is not actually typical of the show. And if I had only watched the pilot and not had access to the rest, I probably would not have kept watching. But that entirely drops out after the first episode, and we join, Steve Banerjee, Soman Banerjee's story, and I thought it picked back up again. And in fact, it isn't just Murray Bartlett, who I agree is extraordinary. He's really, really good and so different than in White Lotus, and really kind of an Emmy-worthy performance. But there's a lot of other small performances that are great. I mean, when Juliette Lewis enters the scene, which is toward the end of the second episode, there's a new burst of energy. Anywhere Juliette Lewis goes, right, there's some kind of an edgy, strange kind of energy that she brings. And then in the third episode, Andrew Rannells comes in, who I've seen in person. When I saw Hamilton for the first time, he was singing King George. And I've seen the way that he can just grab an audience and hold you in his hand. And he does that in his few scenes in the third episode. So I'm excited that he's going to be part of the show. So it's got a slow rolling energy that I kind of enjoy, in spite of, yes, that cautionary tale side that Sam mentioned. Like this is not going to sort of give you that gleeful rush that a male stripper scene in Magic Mike is going to give you. But it has a lot going for it. I feel like the writing so far has not quite been up to the performances, but everybody seems really all in, and I respect that.
Interesting. I mean, I found the writing, to be perfectly honest, I watched the first two episodes. I found the writing so excruciating. The thought of moving on to a third was just impossible. It often felt to me like a true crime podcast can get away with this. No disrespect, but it can have a kind of, okay, here's the real story behind Chippendales. You didn't know that it was filled with all this sleaze-tastic, byways and double dealings, and oh my God, it was connected to the, Dorothy Stratton murder suicide, right? Like, holy moly! Like, and there is a way in which, when you're doing true crime, and it doesn't feel overly fictionalized, just sort of, My Favorite Murder, right? Just kind of, it's like literally practically reading freaking Wikipedia entries on these fantastical things that actually happen in real life. I felt like they went from that kind of raw material, as Sam says, this true crime nonfiction book, to a script in they literally put like a frickin' stove timer, tick, 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 and said, all right, you have an hour to produce this, go. And the only character I cared about at all was Nick DeNoia, who's fascinating because he's a portrait in closeted loneliness and, talk about a creatively thwarted human being. And he finds this odd canvas upon which to express himself, which this was a totally, I mean, Sam, the show does an admirable job of telling you this was a completely unprecedented concept, right? I mean, no wonder $1 billion lurked beneath it. Is the idea that men would strip for women was at the time virtually unthinkable. I mean, they may play that up a little here, but it was unexpected, to put it mildly. And he turned it from something kind of retail storefront. He gave it choreography and style, and that was really what made the business. That story is a fascinating one.
Right. I mean, I'll go back to some more of the episodes. I gather there's one in which Andrew Rannell sings a song from Stephen Sondheim's Company. So I'm definitely going to watch up until that point. But I do think, I mean, Steve, you mentioned sort of that this could be done as a podcast. I mean, and the thing is, there actually is a podcast of this story called Welcome to Your Fantasy that came out last year, kind of right as they were starting production on this. And I don't want to be, reductive and say like, well, that one was, like hosted and produced by women. And this one was created in the first couple episodes directed by men. And that's why, the podcast version is sort of more fun and celebratory, because Magic Mike was also written and directed by men. And that's like a totally glorious spectacle. But there is, I feel like you're missing a piece of the Chippendales story if you're not, getting into that aspect of it, and I feel like this kind of the show, tells us that women are going well, but it doesn't really like give us the characters that are doing that so much. Juliette Lewis really does bring enormous life to it. She is the costume designer, fictional character, but she is the one who comes in and designs the breakaway pants, which become, so iconically associated with this. And she is, a kind of over the top, lusty, like huge personality that the show really needs more of, and it doesn't have.
Dana, as pleased as I was at your response to the Fablemans, which really echoed and ratified my own, I'm surprised to discover it sounds like you are going to follow this one to the very bottom of its barrel. You were really watching every one of these episodes?
I don't know. It's 8 episodes, right? I've already watched almost 3, and yeah, I might keep letting it unfurl. I think a little bit like the last Hulu show we talked about, Reboot. It's not a perfect show, but it's pretty good at baiting the hook so that you want to watch the next episode. And I'm just interested in Murray Bartlett's career now. I want to see what Murray Bartlett does next, because he is such a shapeshifter, right? I mean, he brings a completely different energy to this than to White Lotus. And in both cases, he's a supporting character. That's the most interesting thing about the show. And that in itself will get me through. Plus, there's lots of naked dudes doing insane dances, wearing nothing but a collar and a bow tie, which, that's just good in and of itself. That's good TV.
Sam, how far are you going with this?
I'm going up to the Sondheim song, and then we'll see.
All right. Well, I had that wonderful revelatory moment where you're like, wait a minute, that's the guy from White Lotus, 5 question marks. He's wonderful. He's worth the price of admission here alone. So I guess I'll crawl back to it. But anyway, all right, it's called Welcome to Chippendales. It's on Hulu. Again, we're like kind of split. So we love to hear what you guys thought. So shoot us an email. All right, let's move on.
This podcast is brought to you by Slate Studios and Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab believes in breaking down the barriers to investing, making it accessible to all. Ray is a director of user experience. Her passion is making education accessible to all investors. Through digital design and experiences, Ray ensures Schwab's technology works seamlessly for clients so they can make informed decisions about their finances.
I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't learn it in school. What is a stock? What is a mutual fund? What are futures? All these different financial instruments. And so every day I come in thinking about the real person who doesn't want to spend their time studying and becoming experts in this, yet they need to have enough knowledge to make sure they're protected and doing the right things. My expertise is always representing what our clients need, how to talk to them in a way that lets us meet them where they are, and always advocating for doing the right thing for them.
At Charles Schwab, they're not just financial people. They're people too. With free investing education and 24/7 support, Schwab offers the tools to help you pursue your financial goals. That's how Schwab makes investing accessible for all. Learn more about what sets Schwab apart at schwab.com/whyschwab.
This episode is brought to you by Saks.com. You know, at holiday time, everybody has somebody on their list that it's hard to shop for. I think for me, the hardest person would probably be my dad. Is it possible that dads in general are tough relatives to shop for? I know in my family, everyone I can think of who is a male parent is a difficult gift choice person. If you have people like that on your holiday list, a quick scroll of the Saks.com holiday gift guide is the easy way to shop for everyone on your list. They have everything from whiskey glasses to handheld weights to beauty sets. For the hardest to please, the editors at Saks.com have picked out Baccarat barware and Versace home decor. Saks digital stylists are even available to give you free gifting help and personalized recommendations, whether you're shopping for others or for yourself. Plus free shipping, free returns every day at Saks.com.
Okay, on to the saga of Taylor Swift and Ticketmaster. As background to this story, you guessed it, it's your supposed democracy acting in the interests of the already rich and powerful. Specifically, the Justice Department, the wonderfully misnamed Justice Department, approved a $2.5 billion merger in 2010 that allowed Ticketmaster and Live Nation to become one gigantic ticket selling and promoting behemoth. And it's that new company, Live Nation Entertainment, that is basically, Sam, an entertainment world octopus. And Sam, they exert an inordinate amount of control over fans' access to especially big name live entertainment, musical entertainment like Taylor Swift. Everything crashed. Prices got way out of control. I heard prices as high as whatever it was, $25,000 and up for Taylor Swift tickets. And this is really the story of the Titanic and the iceberg and the twain finally meeting. I think if there's one thing you don't want to take on in the world of entertainment, it is Taylor Swift and especially her fans. So I'm curious what you make of this story and whether we're at a moment of reckoning or whether we'll go back to business as usual.
Well, I mean, having spent several hours on several consecutive days trying and eventually succeeding to get Taylor Swift tickets, I mean, this reckoning is way overdue. I wanted it to happen, back when Pearl Jam tried to take them on in the early 90s. The merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation is just, such a joke. It makes so obvious that there's basically no such thing as antitrust law in the US. The effect of that was people pointed out, well, maybe it's bad to have the biggest ticket provider and the biggest controller of all the biggest venues to be the same company. Won't that be anti-competitive? And basically Live Nation promised not to use their influence to their size to influence people to take deals and have to use their venues. And they broke that promise. They made another promise in 2019 to do the same thing. They're clearly breaking that again. It took, apparently there was already sort of a DOJ investigation going on, but it kind of became public after this whole Taylor Swift fiasco. So it really kind of can't happen too soon. It's just, I'm not comfortable saying how much I ended up paying for 3 Taylor Swift tickets, but I will say that we paid $350 in service charges.
Just
to Ticketmaster. Yes. So that's
for the worst service imaginable, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's just, they've been a joke for a long time. I hate the fact that, touring is the only way that musicians can reliably make money now. Ticketmaster is taking this huge tranche off the top of that to provide terrible service. It just makes my blood boil in about 100 different ways.
Yeah, well, Dana, this is the story of 2 neoliberal behemoths, Taylor Swift and monopoly pricing power, arriving at a galvanic moment. The sentence that I find most revealing and depressing is this supposedly renewed Justice Department inquiry, and I'm quoting now, reprises the focus. What a wonderful piece of Orwellian doublespeak of the 1994 probe inspired by Pearl Jam. That's how long strategic looking the other way of our government has been going on in the face of a screamingly unfair monopoly. Tell me what your reading about this subject has made you think and feel.
Yeah, I mean, this to me was a real expose of a subject because I don't do a lot of pricing of tickets for big pop concerts like that. I mean, I've never had that experience that Sam mentions of, being caught in the web of 21st century Ticketmaster. And then when I started reading about some of the practices in the industry, my jaw was dropping. I mean, it's not just the vertical monopoly of Live Nation and Ticketmaster being in bed together, but the fact that I guess this is about a decade ago that Ticketmaster implemented dynamic pricing, right? Yeah. Which is clearly something influenced by the gig economy and Uber and Lyft and these services that just decide to change their prices based on demand from day to day. And that experience I have had and gone insane with. That experience of, a car ride that a few hours before cost you one amount suddenly costs you twice that much of an amount because there are a lot of people who want a car at that moment. So it really is just the unfettered marketplace, right? Yeah. Gouging customers for as much as they can possibly get. And the idea that there isn't any such thing anymore as some sort of governmental intervention in those gouging practices is just absolutely infuriating. And it would make me feel like, that's it, I boycott Ticketmaster. I am just skipping every big concert for the rest of my life because I can't be treated this way.
Right.
I do think Steve made an important point there in saying that this is about two neoliberal institutions and not just one, because Ticketmaster is horrible. Everybody hates them. They're also part of their job now is to take the flack for artists like Taylor Swift and like Bruce Springsteen, who has, instituted this dynamic pricing on his last tour so that tickets were going at first sale and not even in the sort of secondary market, which Ticketmaster also controls to some extent. Tickets were going for upwards of $5,000 for his shows, working man's hero, Bruce Springsteen. So, the artists are opting into this stuff because it's money on the table. For the Taylor Swift show, face value, there were tickets that were the highest tickets were, I think, $499, something like that. But a lot of those were only available as part of these VIP packages where you get a bunch of junk for another $400 on top of that. So they're $900 tickets and not $500 tickets. Obviously, Taylor Swift's getting a cut of that she's opting into that system. So the idea that Swifties are going to rise up and take down monopoly capitalism. I mean, and I say this as a Taylor Swift fan, but being a Taylor Swift fan is sort of opting into monopoly capitalism in the first place. So you can't really be both of those things.
Beautifully said. Thank you. So a couple things that I would say, Dana, just a slight emendation to your, comment, which is that it's really the unfettered marketplace, once again, acting as a fig leaf or camouflage for the very fettered marketplace. I mean, in fact, if it were operating as a market, and I am not, believe me, I do not believe in the great, golden calf of the free market at all. But if it were at least a fully operating competitive market with multiple players and no one had monopoly power, at least in a dynamic pricing environment with transparency, multiple providers, you would get something like a competitive price. And that would be okay, I think. And part of the thinking, let's at least follow the original logic and then see how it's been corrupted. The original thinking is a bunch of different things. One is that in the age of the internet, you had a bunch of secondary sales markets that were being gamed by effectively online scalpers. So they would go and buy up huge blocks of tickets, control it. They bore no relationship to the venue, to the artist, or to Ticketmaster. They would just control these huge blocks and then create a secondary market that they largely controlled. Was very, pretending to be like, oh, you can't get these anymore, so this is this great service. And all of that market was being captured by effectively these scalp outlets. That was a terrible practice, and correcting for it made a lot of sense. As to Springsteen, I mean, I think the working class hero thing is, the ways in which he's travestied that over the decades deserve calling out. I will say that if it were a fully functioning dynamic marketplace and the additional amount of money was just a competitive price among fans, what they're willing to pay, what they're willing to bid. I mean, we can go to the deeper causes of inequality that allow for someone to lay out $50,000 for their kid's 14th birthday to see Taylor Swift. That's revolting, and I'd like to kill that at its source. But if we live in such a world and we can't change everything about it overnight, the artist maybe ought to capture some of that, or a lot of that, if not all of that gain. So I understand why the artist then tries to get in and say, okay, well, if this is what it's going for and I'm getting X percent, and this is I don't make any money off of my recorded music anymore, thanks to Spotify. Why should I get a percentage of a $300 face value only to discover that it's being sold for $20,000, $30,000. I mean, the same thing is in the art world, and I think we probably see some dignity in an impoverished artist painting a work that then goes on to be sold for, God knows, $20, $40, $60 million. Shouldn't the artist participate in that ridiculous markup? Somebody is going to. So I think the artist getting a piece of that isn't really such a terrible thing. Traditionally, they don't see any of that gain. So there's that. The problem, of course, is that starting with Reagan, unsurprisingly, we got nothing. It may be that a full free market revolution would deliver a panacea as promised by Reagan. A half a free market revolution delivers the nightmare society that we all live in today. Because what you get is all of these bid ups, but they're not actually because of a functioning market. They're because of monopoly power. So it wasn't just that Reagan slashed regulation. It's that under his auspices, the Justice Department became a look the other way branch of the government that allowed for the creation of monopolies, i.e. pretty radically non-market conditions. And lo and behold, the consumer and very often the creative artist gets screwed. So that's how we've arrived at this moment. So the question is, and I think Sam is right about this, is to what extent are artists like Taylor Swift and Bruce Springsteen, who are after all global brands, they are worth $500 million, $1 billion more dollars themselves. They themselves are creations of the neoliberal nightmare that we all live in. Clearly what we need is a regulatory state to step in and at a bare minimum act as a guardian to this supposed marketplace. Not a bunch of individual artists who are suddenly asked to choose between their own interests and pocketbooks and the public good. Like, what kind of a society have we created that is now up to Taylor Swift and her conscience to overcome, 50 years of neoliberalism? It's patently absurd.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being so much a bigger question than just this question, right? I mean, it's sort of like whatever happened to antitrust lawsuits, right? Whatever happened to the government's role in keeping capitalism from running completely rampant? And I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I agree that it's the tragedy of our time that this is all up to individual consumer decisions or individual artist decisions, rather than there being any recourse whatsoever to some kind of regulatory entity. So I don't know. It made me so enraged researching this topic that it made me want to somehow burn down the entire music industry. And that's coming from, as I said before, like somebody who is pretty out of touch with what it is to be a consumer of pop music. It's supposed to be pop music, right? I mean, whether or not you describe yourself as a working class hero, as a singer, it should be to some degree accessible to go and hear live music in a giant stadium, without paying your entire monthly salary for the tickets. It is absolutely absurd that that's what the music industry has become.
And the fact that as of this morning, I looked at the show we're going to in May, and as of this morning on StubHub, the $99 seats in the upper decks are going for a minimum of $750. That's just bad. That's not that's not popular. This is like Fall of Rome type arrangements, and something needs to change.
Right. Yeah, there's a difference between something being a special treat that you blow some money on for your kid and, not being able to pay your mortgage or buy food because you went to see Taylor Swift sing a few songs. Right.
Is it Spring Break or Taylor Swift concert? Yeah, I mean.
Yeah. Oh, dear. Well, thankfully we didn't confront that dilemma in our household. All right. Well, this is one that like we'd love to hear some of your rage in order to stoke ours, and we'll climb that unhappy ladder together, listeners. So shoot us an email about this. Did you pay? If you paid up for this, or on and on. We'd love to hear about it. Okay, let's move on.
Hey listeners, you know that here on the Culture Gabfest, we are all about getting real when it comes to what's going on in our culture, from highbrow to pop. We wanted to share with you another podcast that gets real about one of the biggest issues in American society, our racial divide. Harvard professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad and journalist Ben Austin are best friends, one black and one white, who grew up together in Chicago. On their podcast, Some of My Best Friends Are, they have insightful discussions about the intricacies of race and how it plays a role in everything, from politics to pop culture. They invite guests, like former Attorney General Eric Holder and TikTok historian Sherman Dilla Thomas, to join critical conversations that are at once personal, political, and playful. From examining famous interracial friendships to protecting voting rights, Khalil, Ben, and their guests try to make sense of the moment we're all living in. Listen to Some of My Best Friends Are wherever you get your podcasts.
Right now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse Dana. What do you have?
Steve Sam actually spoiled my endorsement during our Chippendales segment. I was going to endorse and recommend this podcast, this 9-part podcast about the Chippendales story. If you want to hear the true unfictionalized version of the seedy origin of Chippendales. And I've not heard the entire podcast yet. I'm a few episodes in. I was listening to it as research for the show, but I think that it arguably handles the story, well, both, more truthfully, obviously, because there's not any need for compression or inventing characters, but also I think maybe more entertainingly and in a tighter way than the Hulu show does. So the podcast is available. I see it on Spotify. I'm sure it's any place you can get podcasts. It is a Spotify original podcast, and it's called Welcome to Your Fantasy. And you get to hear a historian who has researched this really extensively, unpack it episode by episode.
That sounds amazing and exactly what this show made me pine for. So I'm going to seek that out. Sam, what do you have?
I am recommending A Christmas Carol. And of course, I need to specify which of the 9,000 versions I'm talking about. But what I mean is a version that is currently on Broadway. It is a one-man show performed by the actor Jefferson Mays. I have to admit that Jefferson Mays is sort of an acclaimed, award-winning theater actor, but I basically knew him primarily as the character Daddy's Boy from Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, which is this really sort of goopy classic Hollywood parody. And I went into this, the description that I read was, okay, he plays, 50 characters in the show, including a potato. And I was like, well, this sounds kind of, like a fun lark. Maybe I'll take my mom. We'll go on a Friday night. I went, and it's actually like this really kind of staggeringly theatrical Victorian ghost story. The first clue is that it starts with the opening line of Dickens' original text, which frankly I had not read before, which is Marley was dead to begin with. The house lights are down, and then Jefferson Mays just kind of slips seamlessly into all these characters. It's not really a stunt. It's like he's just telling the story. So he's just changing characters as the story changes points of view. But it's with just sort of a few theatrical tools in this really incredible performance. It really just kind of shapeshifts. It's actually pretty intense and scary in a way that sort of reminds you why this story has endured for so long, which almost no other version I've ever seen does. It's always like, why are there so many Christmas carols? And this sort of answers that question, among other things. So it is up on Broadway, I believe, through the first of the year at least. And I really do recommend it.
Oh my God. I can't help myself. I have to say, I read it last year or during one of the COVID Christmases to my kids. It is an extraordinary piece of popular literature. I mean, it deserves to have endured as much as it did. It's weirdly powerful. And anyway, I recommend that too. It's such a worthy piece of Dickens. And, there's also this crazy argument that he sort of invented Christmas with it, that it wasn't necessarily celebrated in quite the way it has been since because of the popularity of Christmas Carol. On and on and on.
Can I jump in with my tiny Christmas Carol recommendation since we're talking
Oh my
about the
God,
story?
yes.
First of all,
Yeah.
that Broadway show sounds great, Sam, and I may take my daughter to see it because we're both huge fans of Christmas Carol. But I read it every year, and I watch the movie every year. It is one of my favorite stories in the world. And
Which
I wanted
version?
to
Which
just-
movie?
The Alistair Sim version.
Yeah,
Got to
yeah.
be the
Yeah,
Alistair Sim
which is
version. That's just the
masterpiece,
ultimate
yeah.
Scrooge. The ultimate
Yes,
Scrooge.
I
I'm sure
agree.
I've talked about it on this show before. And in fact, I'm doing a guest spot on this CNN documentary this season about Christmas movies and Christmas TV shows. And I talk about it some and about how Alistair Sim is the greatest Scrooge ever. But I also wanted to endorse, I have two Christmas traditions related to Christmas Carol. One is watching that movie as close to Christmas Eve as possible every year. And the other is listening to Tim Curry read it on the audiobook version, the unabridged audiobook of Christmas Carol, read by Tim Curry, which I try to wrap presents to every year. And it's just a fantastic reading, so funny and scary and dry. And he just gets every single, every little nuance of the story, including just the beautiful sentiment, you know, the nostalgia. And he's the best, Tim Curry reading Christmas Carol.
Okay, I have happened across the all-time greatest factoid here. We got to keep going with this for a second. You're telling me that Alistair Sim is the actor in the great live action, you know, the film Scrooge, which is just like, you know, a total masterpiece. He voices Ebenezer Scrooge in one of my favorite versions of A Christmas Carol, which is a Chuck Jones produced animated Christmas Carol that I think you can find on YouTube that is so haunting and weird. It is a beautiful, like, and it's very short. It's like 20 minutes long, but it's really haunting and very disturbing. I mean, it's very much about like the ill conscience of this human being, the hoarder, you know, the person of, you know, no generosity of emotion or money. And it's just fabulous. I just had no idea that was the same person in both. Anyway, all right. I have to ask, do you guys know this singer-songwriter Jessica Pratt?
Nope.
I do not.
Okay, a whiff, an ofer. She's very, very highly regarded, and I've wanted very badly to connect with her music. She has a really interesting, slightly like almost like it's being played to you over a Victrola, anachronistic sounding to me voice, ye oldie voice, singing style, even though she's contemporary. And I had trouble, almost like Sam with Michelle Williams. Like it's like I admire this. I want to love it. Why don't I love it more? I can't get beyond what strikes me as possibly an affectation. I finally broke through. Listen to the song "Back Baby," and there's a comma between "back" and "baby."
Go back, baby. Go back, baby.
That melody, there's something totally haunting and wonderful about it. And then very quickly to add to that, I've discovered a tenor saxophonist, Ike Quebec, like the province. I'd never heard of him before. I'm just absolutely digging his album, Blue and Sentimental. It's every bit as good as that Sunny Red record, so check it out. Sam, what a fun show. What a really fun show. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks so much.
Dana, a really good one. Always a pleasure, but something especially great today.
Yeah, you know it's a good show when with every single topic you're saying, but one more thing. Wait, do we have time? One more question. I had so much to say about everything this week.
Yeah, it makes for a tough edit, but, you know, Cameron's a superhero in that regard. All right, well, you'll find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our research assistant is Jessica Balderrama, and our producer is the aforementioned Cameron Drews. For Sam Adams and Dana Stevens, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.
This episode is presented by Best Buy. So it's official. We're now in the midst of the holiday shopping season. I feel like after Thanksgiving is over, we're allowed to say that. I really don't like hearing Christmas carols or seeing Santa in people's yards until Thanksgiving afternoon. And after that, it's all part of the spirit. That also means it's time to start thinking about getting gifts for our friends, our family, and loved ones, and thinking about gifts that we might want to receive. Steve, I have a very general question for you about gift giving. How does your family approach presents during the holiday season? And do you have any traditions related to gift giving that come up every year?
So it's funny. I grew up in a family where it was I only realized later it was a very odd philosophy of gift giving, which is that at Thanksgiving with my extended family, my mother and my aunt would sort of trade long lists, derived directly from the testimonials of the children and others about what to get. So there was sort of asking for XYZ and receiving XYZ. And there was, believe me, nothing lavish about any of that. So it wasn't like you asked for a pony, you got a pony. It wasn't that. It was like you kind of knew to ask for a pair of socks, a book, and something else, right? And so it was very weirdly automated, and sort of surprise and thoughtfulness, I guess, was downplayed. And so as with all of my nuclear family creation and parenting, I've massively overcompensated to the other extreme now. And so it's kind of this winging it free-for-all where you make up for a total lack of forethought and planning with thoughtfulness and deep feeling and kind of hit and miss, but the hits are amazing. And the misses live on in family lore practically forever. But I would say that is if it could be dignified with the word philosophy, I'd be impressed by that philosopher and want to read her collected works. But let's call it a philosophy of gift giving, but it results in a lot of joy and amusement and in the moment, spontaneous expressions of affection. So I think it works. There's also, by the way, my kids saying, I want a friggin' pony, Daddy. And I go and buy them the friggin' pony. So what about you, Dana? I'm curious.
I guess it is kind of chaos reigns. Usually my daughter, who is an only child, gets one big gift, and it's usually her grandparents that give it to her because it's something that we either can't afford or don't want her to have because it's too lavish. So that's her one lavish thing. But our gift giving as a family, just the three of us at home, and it usually is just the three of us on Christmas morning, is pretty humble. Actually, what we've kind of come around to is that the most important gifts we give each other are homemade. They're crafty, and that is in part because my kid's dad, my partner, is a big maker of things, and he's very, very hard to shop for. He's one of those people who there just isn't anything in a store that feels right for him. Steve, you know him. You kind of can see how that's true, right? He's somebody who it's so much more meaningful and fun for him to get a drawing that you made, or some sort of crafty thing or some sort of odd found object that reminds you of him than to just go into a store and try to find the essence of him there. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't shop for gifts, because all that crafting involves a lot of, heading out to get the materials for crafting. But actually just yesterday, I was consulting with my daughter, who's now 16, about what various drawing things and glues and things like that she needs to make the stuff she needs to make for her dad, which is usually some sort of illustrated in-joke. It's her turning some sort of ongoing dad-daughter, corny teasing theme into a visual representation. So that's usually a big fun part of Christmas morning for us. All right, Steve. Well, we've talked now about our generous gestures towards others. Let's do a round on what you selfishly want for Christmas this year. Is there anything over the holidays that you're hoping your family or somebody else presents you with?
I definitely have a cogent philosophy as a gift receiver, which is that thing that you'd be reluctant to buy for yourself, but actually secretly or not so secretly really, really want. And so this year, it tends to be this is how nerdy I am, books from academic presses. I want to say gigantic flat screen TVs to watch the NFL on, which I also want. But it's I don't want to go into the secondary market and deprive the author of, young Bloomsbury, the generation that redefined love, freedom, and self-expression in 1920s England. It's probably not even an academic press. That sounds like a trade book to me. But, that's a $30 book. It should be a $30 book for everyone to get properly paid. We should pay $30 for it. But it's just like clicking that button doesn't really happen. But asking for it and reading it greedily and taking notes in the margins, that's what I'm going to do this year. What about you, Dana?
Well, in response to that, let me just say that as someone whose book retails for $30, I hope a lot of people this holiday season get over that resistance and buy it. Yeah. Am I getting is there anything in particular I want? This is a tough year for me to say that I want something new because I'm in the midst of this giant excavation of everything that I own and an attempt to make my workspace and home less cluttered by getting rid of as many things as possible. So it's hard for me to think of a durable good that I really want this year. But given the lifting of COVID restrictions, I would say that the thing I want most this year is a trip. It would make me really, really happy to open a package that was basically a credit for a ticket on an airline, or even somebody going to the trouble of saying, I've gotten these tickets, although that's going to require, of course, some consultation and advanced planning. But the big thing that I hope happens in 2023 that hasn't been happening is travel, especially travel abroad.
That's a lovely, lovely idea.
All right. Well, Steve, it was nice getting a little glimpse into the very special Metcalf family Christmas special with you. And I hope all of our listeners have a very, very happy holiday season. You can shop great deals now on gifts at Best Buy.